Our guest Paul Knight is a major in the Army Reserve, formerly Territorial Army, and has an interest in the role of the Territorials in the First World War, especially those from Lancashire. He's currently serving in historical analysis at the Land Warfare Centre, where relevant historical examples are used to support the modern Army's activities. Paul holds a PhD in history, is a Fellow of the Royal Historical Society, and the author of several military history books. He has a long-term interest in the First World War in the Middle East and would like to get out to Gallipoli more often than time and money permits. Over to you, Paul. Thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you for the introduction, Warren. Yeah, so my interest in the territorials, interest in the Middle East, in the First World War in general. I did manage to get out to Gallipoli twice over the winter, which was quite good because it's probably been about 8 years since I've been out there. Because of the nature of my job, one of the things I'm interested in particular is the doctrine and how battles were conducted rather than the actual fighting of them. So when I started looking at Third Krithia, I realised that this was actually seems to be a really successful battle on behalf of the brigade, at least. It did seem to me that sometimes we tend to read a lot of the books that we read will usually put down failures down to a failure of staff work and a failure of planning. So I've split this talk into three parts. One is a bit about the battle itself, although I'm assuming you're all going to be generally familiar with it. So that'll be a bit of a cursory overview, but focusing on the 127th Brigade. Then I'll look through some of the staff work that goes behind it. How was this battle put together, and just how big that, or not very big, that doctrine was. Sorry, not the doctrine, the staff work and the planning. And then finally, I've got some comments from other participants explaining that the battle as they saw it and how it actually unveiled, which is separate from how the generals intended it to take place, as I'm sure you'll imagine. So this is my sort of overview map of the area. So this is section of the section of 42nd East Lancashire Division, beginning of June 1915. The numbering of the territorials has only just come in. So 42nd Division, East Lancashire Territorials, 3 brigades, 125th, which is the Lancashire Fusiliers. They land in Gallipoli and take part in 2nd Krithia. You've then got the 126th Brigade, which is the East Lancashires, and 127th Brigade, which is the Manchester Brigade. And that's made up of 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th Manchesters. And my hometown is Wigan, which is a hometown of the 5th Manchesters. So that's one of my other interests in this. Now, I said that the Lancashire Fusiliers had landed and taken part in 2nd Battle of Krithia. The Manchester Brigade, this is their first battle. And bear in mind that the Territorials and, people have different views about how effective the Territorials were. They'd wintered in Egypt, and that's probably done them a lot of good getting away from the UK. But this is going to be their first battle ever. So, there's questions to be asked about military efficiency and things like that, about how well they do when lacking in experience. So this is the 42 Brigade 42 Division sector you've got in front of you, and it's only about 1,200 yards from left to right. And for those of you who know the Gallipoli Peninsula, that's running straight through the middle is the that main Krithia road. The British frontline trenches are marked by the blue zigzags. You'll see in the middle of the British sector there's a rectangle, which is that's Redoubt Cemetery today, which will give you the orientation. North is off to the top left-hand corner, so it's not really orientated particularly well, but that doesn't really matter. Within the division area, most of this area is flat, but there are 2 nullahs, one of which is on the right, which is underneath the right-hand divisional boundary with the Royal Naval Division. And the left-hand boundary is, the left-hand nullah is Towards the left-hand boundary, there's a row of there's a darker section which I can't really point out on this, but in between the flat ground, you've got these two deep nullahs, which are the two main features on the battlefield. And then facing them with the red markings are the Turkish first and second line trenches, which is objective 1 and objective 2. The plan of the attack, it's actually relatively quite simple, and all the symbols are marked up for the beginning of the attack. There is going to be a bombardment to soften up the enemy, which is the First World War. So this is what usually happens. At 11:20, there'll be a pause, and the first wave of British infantry who are still in the trenches will simulate an attack in order to encourage the Turks out of their trenches onto the firing steps. And 10 minutes later, the British artillery will open up again and try and catch the Turks in the open. At 1200 hours, midday, the first wave will rush across, going for the first objective. And 50 minutes later, the second wave will rush forward and they will secure the second objective. And that's pretty much it. This is not a breakthrough battle. First and second Krithia are breakthrough battles, but this one is more of a bite and hold. So if you're familiar what happens on Ypres in Third Ypres in 1917, they try and do the breakthrough battles, and after a while they give up and they switch to bite and hold. This is the same sort of thing that's happening here. How the divisions going to fight the battle? The first line is going to be made up of 4 half battalions, one from each battalion in the brigade. They're going to be supported by a company of engineers and half a battalion of infantry. And the engineers and that's 5th half battalion of infantry are there to consolidate and secure the trenches and do the engineering work, which I'll touch on a bit more later on. The other half of those 5 battalions and the 2nd Divisional Engineer Company, they will form the second wave. And then in reserve, there's a battalion of Manchesters who will secure the frontline trenches once they've been evacuated, once the troops have gone forward. And then 2 battalions of Lancashire Fusiliers who are there to protect left and right should it be needed. On the division's left is 29 Division, and then on the far left is the Indian Brigade, 29 Brigade. And then on the division's right is the Royal Naval Division, and then the French Corps. Now, as far as the brigade is concerned, this all happens very well, all goes according to plan. First Turkish objective is secured at 5 minutes past 12. And then at 12:30, the second objective is secured. And that is pretty much it. Except that if you do a study an hour or two later, what they've looked at across the whole peninsula is that on the far left, the Indians have failed to make much headway. On the immediate left, the 29 Division has made some ground, but that's left 42 Division's left flank exposed. So basically, there's a gap between the old frontline trenches and having seized these objectives. So the flanks are in the air, which is not a good position to be in. On the right flank, the French have failed to make any headway. They end up back in the first line in their start positions, which exposes the right of the Royal Naval Division. They then have to pull back to their start positions, and in turn that means that 42 Division's right flank is also exposed. So a couple of companies of Lancashire Fusiliers are moved in to block the gap to the right, try and secure that flank, but they find that the Turkish troops are counter-attacking, which is what we'd expect them to do, and they're making use of the 2 nullahs, the deep ground, to try and infiltrate in. At some point in the afternoon, B Company 6th Manchester has overextended up the nullah on the left-hand side and probably bumped into the Turks who are counter-attacking and is largely wiped out. The other bit of a disaster that falls the brigade, although it doesn't seem to have an immediate effect, is that the Brigadier Noel Lee is severely wounded in the face. He's been evacuated and will die of his wounds on Malta. He's then replaced by Colonel Hayes, who's the CEO of 8th Manchester's, but he's actually killed very, very shortly afterwards. It's possibly the shortest brigadier appointment in the British Army's history, unfortunately. So there's then a third brigadier appointed, which is Lord Rochdale, who's the CEO of the 6th Lancashire Fusiliers. But in this critical phase, having a loss of command and control like that is not going to help the planning and the conduct of the battle. Towards the evening, there's also it's a late afternoon. There's an attempt to have a second attack using the Corps Reserve, and there's got two options really. They can either exploit success, which would be putting the Corps Reserve through this area that's in the map, or they can try and stick to the original plan and move the entire front, from one coast to the other coast forward. That is the plan that they decide to follow, because the overall plan is not to do a breakthrough; it is to advance the line, and only by advancing the line can you secure the salient that the 127 Brigade have created here. Unfortunately, the French are not able to participate, so they don't move. So the Royal Naval Division doesn't move. On the left, there's another attack by the Indian Brigade, but that doesn't make much headway. So there's no real movement on the left-hand side either. And towards the evening, permission is given for the division to withdraw from the Turkish second objective back to the first objective, which is where they dig in and secure. And for those of you who know about the August offensive, this now new front line includes the vineyards and that feature, which will be important later on. So that's a bit of an overview of the battle. Like I said, it's not a breakthrough battle. Then we tend to get commentators can get a bit carried away with that. But having reached the Turkish second objective and fought the way through it, there's now really is nothing between them and Achi Baba, which is, as you know, is the first day objective. But without reinforcements coming through, there's not a lot they can do about it. So that's a big picture of the battle. The bit I'm particularly interested in is how the battle was planned and conducted. And this is the one of the pages, which I'll summarize some of the key points later on, so you don't expect you to read it. Army Corps Order number 1 is issued on the 1st of June 1915, which is only 3 days before the battle goes in. And it's given the overall intention. And here we've got the details for this 10-minute pause in the middle of the artillery barrage, that the soldiers in the front line will fix the bayonets, show them above the parapet, open steady rifle fire, and the machine guns will open fire later on, and try and trap or encourage the Turks into the open where they can be caught by the second artillery barrage. So they are thinking about how to overcome the problems with the defenders being in deep trench positions, which is impervious to the artillery that's available at the time. There's a bit about the importance of moving on time, and this is one of these things where, if you're the planner with the best way of the world, you can plan a battle, but unless people do as they're told, it's all going to go to pieces. So this middle sentence, which I've highlighted, absolute accuracy of timing and the movement is of vital importance. Otherwise, the whole value of the artillery preparation will be lost. Trying to emphasize as much as you can that you must move on time. And this is the thing we find, particularly on the Western Front later on in the war. You've got to keep up with the creeping barrage. It's more dangerous to wait, hold back from your barrage, because that gives the Germans opportunities to get into their positions. and also it's not only the officers that have to have their watches synchronized, but the NCOs and the men. It's almost a democratization of responsibility for the success here. Everybody needs to know what the time is. Everybody needs to act. The second, the following day, we've got orders from GHQ, Mediterranean Expeditionary Force, and they're given a bit more specific details on how the attack is going to take place. And this is where it's specified that this is it's a bite and hold operation. It's not a breakthrough, and the attack will be made on the enemy's positions southwest and south of Krithia, Achi Baba, on a date to be notified later. So, this is, we all understand the significance of Achi Baba from day one. However, it does give the caveats that if all these objectives are attained, further advance is practicable, then the enemy must be driven back as far as possible. And this is where the core reserve will be exploited. But I think the key bit is only if it's found practicable. Essentially, everyone's got to move forward together, secure the advance, and then you can advance further forward. Otherwise, you start creating salients which are vulnerable to counterattacks. And this is what the division or the centre sections will do. Royal Naval Division, but particularly the East Lancashire Division. And this is their instructions on what they are to do. So yeah, secure the first Turkish trench, then the second wave goes forward, and then try and seize further opportunity to gain further ground. As I said, we do know that B Company's 6th Manchesters probably took that and overextended and were largely destroyed, which is, well, whether that's lack of command and control because the brigadier's been killed, whether it's enthusiasm resulting from inexperience, or maybe they think they're doing the right thing by following the orders. We don't know, but the consequences were less than ideal. Now, this is a document which I found in amongst the Divisional War Diary, which is issued again the 2nd of June, so 2 days before the attack goes in. It's notes on the attacks of trenches being the result of experience gained in France and Flanders. So Third Krithia is the first time that there's a consolidated trench system on Gallipoli to be assaulted. And there's this passage of lessons coming from France to Gallipoli. This is how we think you should tackle the tackle dealing with trenches. It's the first time, as I said, on Gallipoli that they will have experienced trench warfare. So these are things to think about rather than having to learn from mistakes like they've done on the Western Front. Here's a couple of the items that I've extracted. Officers will be dressed as men. I've never seen any evidence of this actually happening, and I suspect it's probably because they couldn't find soldiers' uniforms, and there probably wasn't a lot of difference at this stage. Anyway, they're starting to get a bit ragged. But trying to make the officers less conspicuous this is a ongoing problem throughout the whole war. So the objective of an assault is to capture the previously determined line, and there's always a bit of a problem of overextending, particularly once you get into a trench system and you lose orientation. But what they've specified is that some of the troops should be designated to continue the assault. Now, bear in mind, this is a general guidance, not specific to this battle, but some troops will continue the assault. Some will erect a new parapet in the occupied trenches. So what they are doing is they are turning trenches, which are first of all the wrong way round, and secondly have been heavily shelled by our artillery, turning them round, reconstructing them, turning them into a defensible position, in preparation for the anticipated Turkish counterattack. And parties will be blocking communication trenches accessible to the enemy and digging communication trenches backwards to your old your old front line. So essentially, rather than going on indefinitely in all random directions, you need to work out what your left and right is and consolidate it and block the trenches, or do whatever else is necessary so you can't be counterattacked that way. And at the same time, start digging communications trenches back so you can be resupplied. And the engineers, they've got two jobs: searching for mines and the wires, detonating wires for them, and cutting telephone cables. So the engineers are up there in the frontline trenches doing combat engineering role. And bomb throwers. This is a constantly reoccurring theme: the number of hand grenades that you need in trench warfare. And Colonel Darlington, who's the CEO of FRHistS Manchester's, in one of his letters home, comments on the perception that the Turks have got a lot more hand grenades than they have. So you need to tell off parties to prevent the enemy using the communication trenches, presumably by bombs. And you also need parties to go back and bring up ammunition and water, which obviously would be helped if there's a communication trench, so you don't have to go over the top again. Again, more advice on procedure for the attack. Advance in line, 1 man per yard, so quite well spaced out. Column formations are too vulnerable, so they're probably being discarded. When the attack coincides with the lengthening of range of the supporting artillery, you should be able to get into the enemy trenches before they can reoccupy it. And again, this becomes a creeping barrage of the Western Front. But what you want is to be as close to your artillery as you can and get into the enemy positions before they realise the bombardment is lifted, and they can then get into their firing positions. And once you capture trenches, you must make them as fit to fight out of as quickly as you can, including rebuilding and reconstructing them. There's not simply a matter of capturing the enemy trenches. The digging starts straight away. And expect counterattacks. Taking the trench is only half the battle, which I think is a very good line. New parapets, blocking communication trenches, getting your machine guns into position, getting your artillery observers forward so you can bring the covering fire in support. And this encouragement at the end: above all, everyone, commanding officers, NCOs and men, must be filled with a determination to win and on no account give up a section of captured trench. So some of the things which I think might be a bit obvious, but for people going into trench warfare for the first time, it's good to be getting guidance from people who've done it previously on a different front. And I think this questions how we look at commanders of the First World War and about how willing they are to learn. Personally, I think they're always willing to learn. It's just not always possible to show the benefits of that learning process. So down to the division, they actually offer 3 different sets of orders on the 3rd of June, starting in the afternoon. I haven't got a time of issue of the last operation order, but bearing in mind the battle will start the following day. These are quite short turnarounds. The preparatory order number 7 is only 2 pages long, and number 6 and 8 they're about 4 or 5 pages each. So they are not big documents, and certainly I know in the army at the moment we are generating huge amounts of paperwork because we've got the computers to do that, we've got the technology. These people, they are covering all the back in 1915 they're covering all the things that need to be covered, but as you got someone to physically type out and then physically deliver each set of orders, it puts a limitation on just how much you can type and how much you can generate. So these are this is the final divisional order, and anyone who served will start to recognize these headings as the key bit. What is the commander's intent? What do we want to do? what are our objectives? It starts to be, I've just noticed I got a typo in there as well, the troops, I apologise. What are our objectives? What are we going to achieve? The details of the troops, that's a little bit of a guidance, and the sequence of attack. This is all your timings and how it's all going to work together. Paragraph 5 is your time to the advance. And this is where it gets a little bit strange, because these orders are actually telling individual soldiers how they are to do the battle, which we wouldn't go into today. We've got a thing called mission command, which is tell people what to do, not how to do it. So here you've actually got orders that the troops will advance at 12 noon exactly at the rush without firing straight at the enemy's trenches. That's just the way they did it in those days, but that's not something we would that's not a level of detail we'd go into. That'd be covered in the training, and people would know how to do this. There's a second objective 15 minutes later. Interestingly, though, the troops in the second wave are in the second line of British trenches, and they get up and out and go over the top, over the first line trenches, and then into through no man's land and into the Turkish trenches. One of the battalions of the Royal Naval Division on the right, they do that, and they are cut down in the open by Turkish machine guns. So it's a very dangerous practice to do. There's probably a risk that they are prepared to take rather than try and get everybody forward and reorganize people through the trenches. And again, consolidation of captured enemy trenches. This is a reoccurring theme. There is an attempt to use the armoured cars at Gallipoli. They don't quite work. There is a party is ordered to start filling in the Turkish trenches and making them crossable for these Rolls-Royce armoured cars. Now, they don't get forward, and I think they get stuck on the British side of the trenches and don't make much headway, and at least one of them gets ditched. But again, they're using this new technology to try and take advantage. If there is going to be a breakthrough along that Krithia road, let's try and do something with it. Doesn't quite work, but they are trying to think through the problems. And then eventually we get onto the brigade orders themselves. This is on 4th of June. This is the morning of the attack that these are issued. And as you'll see, it's all handwritten, and this is all we've got in the war diary. There's actually 7 pages of this. So 7 pages of these handwritten notes or handwritten orders. The other 2 brigades don't have an equivalent set of orders, probably because the battalions are scattered in doing all different tasks. But this is not the way you'd organize an attack today. However, if you don't have the technology, if you've got to rely on pen and paper, then this is how things have got to be done. And again, you can see those first 2 headings of intention and objectives. These are exactly as we would do it today. What's the commander's intent? What does the commander want us to do? And what are our objectives to seize individual sections of trenches? So, like I said, the attack was incredibly successful. I think certainly this brigade attack, although they end up having to give up terrain, but that's more to do with the wider battle. How did people see it at the time? And this is actually a couple of days before the battle begins. And it's a quote which I'll let you read it while I'm talking about William Marshall. He's a regular officer. He arrives at Gallipoli as a brigade commander in 29 Division. Throughout the campaign, he commands 29 Division, 42 Division for periods, and I think 53 Division as well. He then has a division at Salonika, and he's then posted to Mesopotamia, where he has a corps. And then when General Moore dies after the capture of Baghdad, he takes over the entire Mesopotamian theatre of 2 corps and the cavalry division. So he ends up as an army commander by the end of the war. So an experienced officer. I think his he's been given a slightly awkward position, job where he's got to go down and see Brigadier Lee and see how well the brigade is being run. Presumably, the powers that be thought there's a bit of irregularity or something going on. And previously, William Marshall said he's a bit uncomfortable with this, but he gets round the brigade. He says, although unable to say that everything was in apple pie order, I was at the same time impressed with what I saw. I said, this is a brigade that's been on the peninsula 6 weeks, and it's his first experience of combat. And I like his distinction between the 5th and the 6th battalions. So the 5th from Wigan is full of miners, commanded by the people who used to run them in civilian life. And then the 6th is one of these collar and cuff battalions of a bit more middle class, a bit more professional. But two very different battalions, but seems to pass muster, I think, from that description. Lieutenant Berend is with 50 Lancashire, so they're not actually in the attack, but he's off to one side and he's able to observe parts of the battle in his account. But you can certainly hear what's going on. And he says, at 11:30, you hear the pulse of the artillery, and then a very faint cheer, which is the infantry simulating the attack to encourage the Turks into the trenches. Then for 10 minutes, the bombardment seems to redouble in fury until 12 o'clock, and it died away like a spent giant. And then the musketry starts, and that'll be the Turkish musketry as the first wave is getting out of the trenches and charging across no man's land. The Private Sheldon is with 6th Manchester. This account of his is not published. It's in the Tameside archives, which I managed to get to last week to have a look at it. He is in the second wave, and he's describing the first wave go forward, and then it's his turn to go forward. And this is where they're in the British second line trenches, so they're over the top. He only gets about 60 yards, but the first 40 yards of that appears to be between the British first and second line trenches. He then goes a further 20 yards when he's shot through the left leg, which takes him out of the battle. Unfortunately, he's casevaced and evacuated to Gallipoli and makes a full recovery and survives the war. But his first experience of combat lasts all of 60 yards. And then he's out of the game. However, he was there and he's done his bit and he survived, which is the main thing, I think. Jack Morton, he's with 7th Manchester's as well. And I like this opening section of his talk where he says, of his description, I must say I feel awfully proud of being in a unit in such a brigade, but I'd not go through it again for £1,000. So, yes, proud of what he's done, but once is probably enough and doesn't want to go through it again. But he's part of the second wave that has to go forward to the second objective on the Turkish second trenches. And one of the problems they find is what they think is the second line of Turkish trenches is not a full line trench. He describes it as a sham. And so they're trying to lie down, but they're still in the open with no cover. And of course, the Turks know exactly where this trench system is. So when the order comes to retire, they've got to go back, he says, about 500 yards to the rear. But the whole experience seems to have exhausted him, which is probably not surprising doing 1,000 yards, he says. These are estimates cross country with all of his gear and back again. The fact that people are shooting at you and he's only got the energy to walk the last sections back to safety. I think being absolutely jiggered is a bit of a understatement of the state he would have been in at that point. However, he survives the war as well, which is good. So that's his experience. This is Colonel Darlington, who's a solicitor from Wigan, he's the CEO of Fifth Manchester's, and his letters from Hellas are I think essential reading. But I've used this one section because it really just shows that these, in the middle of 1915, the territorial battalions have still got this very much of a family orientation. We tend to associate this with the PALS battalions of everybody joining up from the same community, and about the Accrington PALS on the first day of the Somme, or the well-known examples of the small community losing large number of its menfolk in quick succession. I think the Territorials are already experiencing this, and the fact that he's referring to some of his officers almost on almost friendly terms back to his wife, so his wife would have known who these people are, and he's thinking about their family members as not just Mrs. Leach, but Sydney and Aunt Ruth. I'm assuming that Sydney would be a cousin, I'm assuming, and the son of Aunt Ruth. So very much a family orientation at this. So these casualties would most definitely have hit harder than being in an anonymous unit where you haven't got those family connections, which you're going to get on later on in the war with conscription and things like that. General Hunter Weston, very, very pleased with what the brigade does. The division overall, the other two brigades are busy elsewhere, busy doing different things, but 127 Brigade in particular. General Hunter Weston, he is, whatever we may think of his ability, he is still a senior general, passing on praise to these territorials, these amateurs, in their first action. So this is praise well deserved and certainly praise which I think was given genuinely and was very well received. Not praise not just in Lancashire but throughout the whole empire. Compliments indeed. From the Turkish point of view, there's quite a long paragraph here, but I'll just talk about it in the background. I think generally we tend to be very critical of our own abilities. The artillery was never good enough, never heavy enough, never powerful enough, and there certainly were problems with the artillery. The British field artillery, there's not enough heavy guns. Most of the field guns are firing shrapnel rather than high explosives, and the shrapnel is bouncing over the tops of the parapets, not really destroying the barbed wire as efficiently as it will do later on in the war. The French have got a surplus of quick-firing 75s with high explosives, so these are brought along to support the barrage. And certainly on some sectors, you've got the naval gunfire support as well. However, looked at from a Turkish point of view, this is the heaviest barrage to date on the peninsula. And this German general in the Turkish division, which is facing, it's a Turkish right-hand division, so it's facing the left-hand part of the 42 Division attack. This line, it's impossible to help them. They must simply endure in the dugouts directly behind the front line, ready to spring out and occupy immediately the trenches, or what was left of them, which I think is very telling, the moment the artillery fire lifted and the enemy infantry began to storm. So standing there watching the barrage, waiting for it to pass and not being able to do anything at all to help, you get this feeling of helplessness. We're just going to bring this to an end with this quote again from William Marshall. Like I said, he's a brigadier, several divisional commands, corps command, and an army command in Mesopotamia. he's writing after the event, but still remembering back, this brilliant advance. They broke right through the Turkish defences. In fact, had they been supported on the right flank, the road to cover the position of Achi Baba lay open. Now, of course, that was not part of the plan. Maybe if the corps and the army level generals had the ability to think a bit more openly, a bit more widely, a bit more on their feet, they could have pushed the reserves. And there were considerable reserves available, but position them and push them through to exploit success. This would have given a different outcome to the day, rather than ending it a little bit disappointingly. But generally speaking, I think a lot of the battles at Gallipoli, we tend to lump them together as being ill-planned, not properly resourced, heroic, but ultimately failures and pointless. This is an opportunity that shows what could have happened, or what did happen successfully, and what could have been exploited further. But it was not to be, unfortunately. That, I guess, is the reality of war, which people on the ground have to make decisions. I'm always a bit reluctant to second guess people because I'm not there. It's easy to say what they should have done. However, things could have been different. We will never know. I mean, that's it. That's my paper on 127 Brigade at Third Krithia. So hope you've enjoyed that.